Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, good morning for everyone. As it was said, my name is Oręziak and I'm the assistant professor at the Kardynal Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw. I have a pure pleasure to be also a member of the Central European Professors Network 2024, coordinated by Central European Academy, exactly in the research equality in ever integrating Europe, headed by Professor Marcin Bielec. And before I start, I would also like to thanks, extremely congratulate and thanks to organizers of today's conference. As always, as from the perspective of my 4 years of cooperation, I'm impressed by what, how, and where you are organizing. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much, both for a substantive and organizational team from Central European Academy. But now going to the topic of my speech, today I will be talking about the regulation of AI in EU law and principle of equality. So, ladies and gentlemen, those, in my opinion, who haven't heard should look out at the window because something bigger, in my opinion, something stronger, something more powerful than the already famous GDPR is coming. It's in force now. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about the AI Act. So in the question for me, AI Act, it is the angel or the devil. Boon or bane. The AI Act is a European Union regulation that is obvious. So currently in force, adopted on June 13, 2024. This legal act is a part of the, in my opinion, ongoing trend in the EU towards unifying law. The question, however, is what the AI Act will strengthen equality or if it is an act of power or supremacy for the EU. Either way, what is the cost of such a common regime? What can we say about the AI Act? In my opinion, there is definitely a lot of good to mention, in fact. It addresses the risk associated specifically with the use of artificial intelligence. For example, it sets clear requirements for a high-risk AI system. It establishes governance structures at both at the European and national levels. But yes, and there is a much more, and it's all somewhat true, but there's always a but. The AI Act is a truly powerful piece of legislation. It includes a huge number of legislation, regulations, and many standards and requirements for the EU member states. It introduces a uniform framework for AI regulation across the EU. This is a directly applicable regulation in every EU member state. And it treats all EU member states equally because it requires the same things from everyone. The same AI Act applies to all, requiring them to adjust their national laws accordingly, similar to the GDPR, while led to a separate data protection law being adopted in my country, Poland. And while that's somewhat true, thus requiring the same standards from all EU member states in such a strict way really leads to the realization of the principle of equality in practice. Let's take a closer look at this. So, ladies and gentlemen, the principle of equality has been included, of course, in Article 4, paragraph 2 of the Treaty on the European Union, which imposes an obligation on the European Union to respect the equality of member states under the treaties. This is one of the fundamental principles of the European Union shared by all member states. But in fact, Article 4 of the Treaty of the European Union, equality is closely linked to other principles concerning the relationship between the EU and member states. This is the principle of conferred powers, reserved powers and state functions, the principle of national identity, the principle of loyalty, and the relationship among member states, the principle of loyalty and solidarity. However, even through equality among member states is often raised in political database debates and is gaining more importance. Its legal application has remained limited so far. Ladies and gentlemen, in accordance with the content of Article 4, in my opinion, EU member states are equal under the treaty. This is the content, which in my opinion means they are equal in EU law, equal in relation to the European Union in somewhat kind way, but equal to one another. From this perspective, there are no better and worse states. The European Union respects their equality, but that, as stated in Article 4, paragraph 2 of the Treaty of EU, it also respects their diversity, as EU member states are not the same unit. Ladies and gentlemen, since the treaties themselves emphasize the diversity of member states, thus treating them equally means that they will be equal when they are different. They differ not only culturally, nationally, or even constitutionally, but also economically and technologically. And perhaps the principle of equality requires considering this diversity and does not demand applying the same uniform standards to everyone. Instead, it calls for requirements tailored to the needs and development opportunities of each member state, so that in the future, the European Union in fact can achieve at least a similar level of a technological or economic development regardless of the geographical location. If not, maybe the principle of equality requires sharing resources, knowledge, experiences, technology to support those member states that need it, so they do not fall behind. In any case, it may turn out that we do not always need to treat everyone equally if we truly want to implement that equality. Sometimes, in my opinion, it is obvious that we need to consider the needs, the diversity for development in order to achieve real equality. I believe this is true at least when it comes to the AI Act. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's return to the fact that AI Act is a regulation. This is quite an unusual fact because AI has never been regulated by the EU before, and now we have just a regulation right away. I would like to know why, but in the AI Act itself, it is only stated that it was necessary. It's an uncertain assertion, in my opinion, made without future arguments, simply saying that it is in line with the principle of proportionality or subsidiarity. On the side, this fits into the current trend of unifying laws within the EU. As we remember, this situation is different from the GDPR, where a directive was adopted first and only after many years. After many years was the EU regulation, but as I said, this is a visible trend in the EU now. Does this trend affect the principle of equality among EU member states? Does the choice of a specific form of a secondary legislation matter for the realization of the principle of equality? In my opinion, yes, but we need to pay attention to several aspects. First, the issuance of an EU directive assumes that member states will implement the directive within their own legal system. So, in this case, EU member states are bound by the directive goals and have the freedom to choose the means to achieve that goal. And EU regulations does not provide such a freedom. It binds member states not only its goal, but also to a whole set of provisions outlining the means to achieve that goal. Member states do not have freedom here. They have an obligation to align their laws with the strict provision of the EU regulation. All EU member states must comply in the same way. This means that with a directive, EU member states have a decision-making role in how to reach the directive's goal and can consider their diversity in this process. In the case of an EU regulation, especially a typical hard regulation, there is no room for considering this diversity. Here, EU member states are merely executing the will of the European Union because they must adjust their laws to ensure the effective implementation of directly applicable EU law. So, if we also consider the fact that the content of EU law is often determined by the member states with, how to say, economic and political power, it becomes clear that the choice of legal act from this perspective is very important from the perspective of the principle of equality. I conclude that where the diversity of EU member states is not taken into account, it is difficult to speak about true equality. Perhaps that is why Article 4, Paragraph 2 of the Treaty of EU closely links the principle of equality with the respect for a diversity. Directives support consideration of this diversity, while regulations do not, but I'm not saying that it is impossible. So, ladies and gentlemen, the AI Act does not take into account the diversity of EU member states, in my opinion, at all. And EU regulations like AI Act treat all EU member states equally without exception, which unfortunately can lead to depending economic or technological inequalities in practice. The AI Act is an EU regulation, and we already know that this does not promote the realization of the principle of equality, but this is not impossible in EU regulation. So, but if that, let's look at how the AI Act as a common regime can lead to a potential violation of the principle of equality in practice. So, there is three areas. Differences in technological resources, that is one. Countries with a higher level of technological development can better adapt to the requirements of the AI Act, while less technologically developed countries may face difficulties in implementing the regulations, depending inequalities. Next, slowed innovation in poorer countries. The implementation of strict regulations like AI Act may limit innovation in smaller or just poorer countries that lack the resources to comply with the requirements, while wealthier countries will be able to continue developing AI technologies. And lastly, increased dependence on foreign technology providers. Countries that cannot develop their own AI technologies and the framework of that will be forced to import solutions from more technologically advanced countries, which may lead to greater dependence and loss of technological sovereignty. These are just three examples, but they say a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, it can be read that the goal of issuing the AI Act is also for the EU to become a leader in global AI. Or maybe it is more about ensuring that only certain member states will be the leader. After all, the principle of equality, when it leads to true equality, does not take into account the ambitions of some member states that want to be leader. But these strong countries do not want to slow down or give away their power to choose who need it. These member states operate through EU institutions, strongly influencing their functioning, direction, and decision-making processes. They are not troubled by the illusory loss of sovereignty. So, to the European Union, in my opinion, it is illusory because they do not truly lose it. They just simply exercising their sovereignty in a different, less standard form by EU institutions. Such countries will not mind giving up the principle of equality. Why? Because they will find themselves in a better, not worse, situation. Weaker economically and technologically member states will struggle, while stronger ones will quickly and effectively deal with the implementation of AI Act. This will lead to even a greater depending of inequalities between certain groups of EU member states. Ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, everything could have been done differently, and maybe it is still possible. We could have even kept the AI Act as an EU regulation, but it is essential to take into account the diversity of member states, as only this can truly lead to real equality in the European Union. For example, AI hubs could have been established to pool financial resources, share technological knowledge among member states to strive for that true equality. But it seems that this was not the will of the European Union in this case, which in this case took the form of moving forward to two-speed Europe, with the supremacy of the European Union, or perhaps selected member states. This does not surprise me especially, since I have already read the proposal treaty changes submitted by the European Parliament on November 22, 2023. For those who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a very interesting read. So, ladies and gentlemen, now the question, and sorry for the picture, is whatever the AI Act can be seen as an instrument not for equality but for supremacy. I believe there is a risk that it is, in particular when we observe the ongoing discussion about the federalization of the European Union. Perhaps the AI Act is yet another act in the European Union palette that aims to subordinate the action of member states to the dictates of the European Union or selected member states of the European Union. As I mentioned, the AI Act is unlikely to ensure, in my opinion, the realization of the principle of equality in practice. By not taking into account the diversity of member states, it is more likely to deepen inequalities in the EU through the introduction of a unified legal regime, potentially leading to the dependence of some member states on others and on the European Union. Someone once said that whoever becomes the leader in AI will become the ruler of the world. And in fact, this is true. Perhaps the EU is aware of this, and this is why it issues such powerful legislation, ladies and gentlemen, so quickly, so effectively. Here is that the good goal rises on the banners, and it is legitimate. But the question, what lies behind it? Here it is worth noting one very important aspect. EU does not, in my opinion, have a clear defined competence to regulate AI in the treaties. The EU used Article 114 on Treaty of Functioning of European Union as a legal basis in this regard. This provision speaks about the harmonization of the legislation of member states in the internal market. On this basis, the European Union has created its competence to regulate AI. Of course, it is good that it is addressing these issues, as there is indeed a need for cooperation among the member states of the European Union. However, this cooperation should be based on the principle of equality, taking diversity into account. Yes, it is necessary given the specificity of AI. It should be pointed out that Article 114 Treaty of Functioning of European Union, in my opinion, is hazardous as a legal basis for creating a new competence in this case. This also shows how this provision could be dangerous in future, because it could be applied to almost any new topic. And what is the relationship to the principle of conferral here? So, on the other hand, it is hard to imagine that for every justified new area of regulations, not for reason in the treaties, formal changes would be necessary. But this, at least, perhaps indicates the needs for introducing some additional legal instrument, but not Article 114. Nevertheless, the situation regarding the Article 114 is dangerous in my opinion. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will address all these aspects in my chapter, which will be finalized in December. However, for now, I'm increasingly inclined to believe that the AI Act, by not considering the diversity of the European Union states and introducing a unified legal regime, is a sign of retreating from or abandoning the principle of equality in EU. I often think that the AI Act is not an instrument for equality in the EU, but rather an act for the supremacy of the European Union or maybe selected member states. The rest are meant to stay below, where they are seen as belonging according to EU views, enjoying the benefits of this common regime while bearing its costs. If I maintain this position in my chapter, I will also try to address whatever the loss of equality has been a good price to pay for the benefits of having a common EU regime on AI. So, ladies and gentlemen, with this aspect, I would like to end my speech, and thank you so much for your attention. But one also very important information: all images included in this presentation were created directly by artificial intelligence. So I just put the content text, what I would like to say, and the AI proposed the images. So thank you so much for your attention, and thank you very much.